and welcome everyone to this. I think this is a third alumni event of the IPAA Ethical Integrity Leadership Programme. Having been involved in this journey with IPAA since the inception, always found these events particularly heartwarming. Typically we're doing this, or normally we're doing this with dinner and a glass of wine, and actually that may be the case for you, I would never know. But it's even in this virtual environment, it's a wonderful thing to gather together people from across the Victorian public sector, all with this shared commitment to integrity and ethics. It's a lovely thing. And as Kim says, it feels particularly apposite at this moment. Not only this current public health crisis, but actually the first 2 decades of this century, it feels there's been an ever louder cry for more integrity and ethics in our institutions. So thank you all for kind of making the effort to join us here tonight. And so now on to our Provocateur. We're very excited and pleased to be welcoming Dr. Jenny Gray. As Kim says, she's Chief Executive Officer of Zoos Victoria, with responsibility not just for Melbourne Zoo, but also Werribee Open Range Zoo and Healesville Sanctuary. And all these places have a special place in the hearts of Melburnians. So Jenny's got a wide range of public and private sector experience in the past, has worked in transportation and airlines and banking before moving into the zoo industry. So I find that very hopeful. It's a very similar background to my own. And varied qualifications. Jenny's got qualifications in civil engineering, transportation engineering, business administration, also interestingly ethics, and her PhD thesis was an ethical defence of modern zoos, which would be fascinating. We might hear touches of that tonight. Not only that, Jenny also serves on a number of governing bodies. She's a past president of the World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which would be a wonderful post to hold. She's a member of the Victorian University Council, and president of a small association called Not in My Workplace, which is committed to addressing sexual harassment in the workplace. And we're really looking forward to Jenny. And I don't know how we do this in this sort of muted environment, but if you could sort of silently show your appreciation, and I'll hand over to Dr. Jenny Gray.
So thank you so much, Michael and Kim, for the kind words. And I've never been a provocateur before, so I'm a little excited about having this role, and thank you for this opportunity to share it with all of you. And to start with, I thought, and I didn't realize it was going to be quite as topical, but as we were chatting with Kim in the beginning, to say, let's just run through a little thought experiment. When we think about what's the right thing to do, and imagine for a minute as we're sitting here, and of course this is going to get a little bit more personal because we're not all sitting in a restaurant, we're sitting in your homes, and you hear a noise behind you and you realize there's a rat in the room. Now, Kim just explained that the rats have left the CBD because there's not enough food, so it's quite plausible they've moved into your living room. And you now have to really make a decision. What are you going to do with this little guy that's behind you? You could just ignore it and hope it goes away and find out that it's actually a she, and she's got pregnant and she's got lots of little rats. And when you come back in next week, there's a lot more rats. And already many of you, and I know because a lot of you are in local government, you've already answered this question for me. But some of you might be thinking, wait, hold on. I know rats do a lot of really important work. We use rats in laboratories and animal testing, and we can learn a ton of things. We can put this rat into Melbourne Uni and it would teach us all kinds of stuff. And then there's a few do-gooders amongst you saying, no, don't do that. Don't put the rat into the laboratory. Just let it go. Catch it up in a cardboard box, take it downstairs, take it outside, let it go in the garden. And the owls will thank you for that, because rats are really low on the food chain. And so in all likelihood, the rat you let go is not going to make it through the night, and it's going to be somebody's dinner. Because a rat without its environment really doesn't know what to do. And that would seem a little harsh, but some of you say, no, Jenny, you take the rat and take the rat to your zoo, and you could build this incredible rat enclosure. This is a German zoo who has a rat house in Rat Street. And the rats live inside all the cupboards, and everyone just loves this exhibit. And we could tell people how amazing rats are and really start a new movement. Or all the good old local government people are saying, no, we know what to do with the rat. We'll just kill it. And when it's dead, no one's going to call the police. There won't be an integrity inquiry into why we killed the rat. We're quite fine. And I could stop the talk here, hand it back to Michael and say, fight it out. What do we do with the rat? And we'd find very quickly you all have a fairly strong opinion. In fact, if there was a way of polling you all, we could ask how many of you are killing the rat by a show of hands, and there'd be an overwhelming, let's get the rat out of here. This is not something we need to worry about. But what if I shake it up a little bit more and said, okay, but it's not actually a rat, it's a kitten. And how many of you have changed your position instantly from wanting to kill it to taking it home and cuddling it and looking after it? Because it's a kitten. I mean, look at that face. But why? Why would we want to kill one and take one home? And what if I challenged you a little more and said, it's actually a tiger cub? And you may want to keep it, but you're going to be calling me much quicker on this one than the rat, because you're going to say, Jenny, you've got to look after this tiger. It's endangered. It's critically important. And you would have a different story you would tell yourself. And the reality is that all of these are options that are available to us when we talk about animals. But pretty quickly, we don't spend the time building the argument. We just jump straight to yelling at each other about ethics, because you're going to say, I believe this and I believe that. And we're going to have an argument over what we believe. And what we really need to do is step back and say, how did you get to that position? Why do some of you think it's okay to leave the rat there and others think that we should kill the rat? And so what I've loved in the journey I've been on is to step back a little bit and say, well, what is ethics? Ethics is not arguments. So that's not what ethics is. And the two definitions I've found over the time that I really love is ethics asks, how do I live a good life? And morality asks, how should I treat others? And both of these come together. And when you think about the integrity course, they challenge you on both of these. How do you lead a good life? What is the contribution you're going to make? And how do you treat others? And when we consider animals, this comes into play as well. How do we do this? And ethics for me is not just about beliefs. It's about logical, rational, or deductive argument. It's about laying out what are the facts and assumptions you're using to get to the end, to the conclusion of what you want to claim. And because it's not just beliefs, we don't need to deny science, and we don't need to deny data when we talk about ethics. In fact, we should be embracing science, data, and facts in order to validate our claims and our premises. And there's standards of language that we use when we want to make a good argument. And the standard for an argument, a deductive argument, is that you have a truth of a conclusion which is based on premises. And if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. And you would have learned this 100 years ago in some high school ethical debating society class, and you've forgotten to keep using these. And we so quickly go to our conclusion without pulling out the premises and laying them out. And that means we often make really bad arguments. And we make them bad for a number of ways. So I've brought a cute argument for you all. So here's an argument that says premise 1, all blonde people are smart. Premise 2, Kim is blonde. Therefore, conclusion, Kim is smart. Now, is that a bad argument? It certainly is a logical argument, because if both of the premises are true, then the conclusion will be true. Often what we do is, because we know the conclusion is true, we try to backwards fit some premises that make that true. And we often make mistakes, and probably we need to worry about both of those two premises. So it's certainly not true that all blonde people are smart. I'm not going to even go whether or not Kim is really blonde, but we know Kim is smart. And so these kind of mistakes we make are in the premises. And so when you build an argument, you need to go back and be able to really test. Is this premise really true? Is it sufficient? Is it enough to know that Kim is blonde in order to deduce that Kim is smart? And it probably isn't. There's probably other things we can pull on that are far better and far better correlated in order to reach the conclusion that undoubtedly is true. And there's entire lectures run just on all the fallacies and how you can make arguments that cheat, that draw on all kinds of fallacies and faulty logic, and often just plain lazy arguments. And so when we want to be ethical and we want to know that what we're doing is right, We really want to be able to build an argument and then test it and check that it's true. Because when we end up trying to decide by the right thing to do with these animals, we need to be able to go back and say, well, what were the premises that I held in my mind that tell me that a kitten is different from a rat, is different from a tiger? And are those premises true? Are they sufficient? Are they enough for me to judge that I want to do something different with each of these animals? And this is when science can help us as well. Because science and ethics, when they come together, make a really heady mix. Science tries to answer questions that can be proven with good data, and you want to use your premises to have your premises based on good data, using experiments, observations, to make sure you've got good, strong premises. And ethics is where we're often trying to answer big questions that sometimes you can't prove with data. You need to go back and break it down to be able to get there. And through these rational and logical arguments, they come together. And I think that's the real fun, is when we start using science and data to validate our premises. Philosophers have tried to help us with this as well. And when you're trying to talk in ethics, and I'm sure you covered off a whole bunch of these, there's a whole lot of different ways that we can think about how we talk about what we should be doing. And I'm not going to go through all of those. In terms of animals, I'm going to really quickly say, when it comes to animals, here are some of the theories that you can grab on. So in still trying to answer in your own mind which one of those animals we want to treat and how, animal welfare says quite simply it's wrong to cause unnecessary pain and suffering to animals. And that looks super easy until you try to break it down and you realize you're going to do a lifetime's work on what's necessary and unnecessary. Is it necessary to kill the rat because they spread disease? Possibly. Is it necessary to kill the kitten? Probably not. What is pain and what is suffering? If an animal's going to live a terrible life alive, then it probably is okay to kill it. And so this is a huge area of study. Then you have animal rights, and they ask for 3 rights. They don't ask for crazy rights. They ask for 3 things: a right to life, a right to liberty, and a security of body, freedom from torture. And these rights are based on interest, and you don't need to prove any cognition or knowing. You can do wrong to people who don't understand they're being wronged, and you can do wrong to animals that don't understand they're being wronged. And that's what animal rights argues for. Consequentialism is something we all deal with every single day. It's your profit and loss. There's certain benefits and there's certain costs to everything we do. And what you're really wanting to do is have your benefits outweigh your cost. And so you're looking at pain and pleasure. I did, as part of my PhD, a probably needless experiment. I worked out the total hours of pain and the total hours of pleasure. And I was able to show that there's 13 times as much pleasure in our zoos here in Melbourne Zoo than there is pain or suffering. And most of the suffering we're talking about is boredom. It's nothing gross or really terrible. That we certainly don't do terrible things to our animals. And so for many of our animals, even they're having a better life by being with us, living at the zoo. And then virtue ethics I loved, and I think if you're looking for how you can strengthen your ethics and your approach to ethics, spend some time with the great virtue ethicists. Be careful of Aristotle. He was a virtue ethicist, but some of his virtues are a little dodgy, and they certainly excluded women and they certainly excluded slaves. So that was always a problematic starting point. But the virtue ethics asks, what would a virtuous person do? Not your friends, but a virtuous person. And a great description of the great virtues. These are the values you want to hold true in your heart: courage, wisdom, justice. And how would you behave if you're behaving from a position of courage? How would you behave when you were thinking about compassion or respect? And I really love this, because the other part of virtue ethics is the idea of tragic dilemmas, where there just simply isn't a good answer. And you as a virtuous person have to take a decision that will leave you scarred. And you don't work away without having to bear the difficulty of making a difficult decision. And I know you all do that every day. You have to weigh up where there often is no right, easy answer. It's never that simple, or we wouldn't be even debating it. And this idea of dirty hands, that you still have to act, but at the end you should feel remorseful and guilty about it. It doesn't give you a free pass. And then finally, environmental ethics is a very new field. If you think of virtue ethics, we've been debating this for well over 2,000 years, we've been talking about the environment for about 50 years. And our ethical thinking and arguments are very difficult in this space, and we haven't got it right. And that's why we know we should strive to lift people out of poverty, and we've done a tremendous amount with that over the last 50 to 100 years. But when it gets to animals and the environment, we've done it at a cost to the environment. And more animals are threatened with extinction, more and more animals on the brink. But the difficulty with environmental ethic is when we start trying to expand our scope to include animals, you end up pretty quickly with the idea that there's too many people on the planet. And any ethical framework that suggests it's okay for people to die in significant numbers is never going to work. But maybe we've just found, if I can find a silver lining, another way that we can give the environment a break. And that's if you all just stay home. And that might provide the space within which we can start thinking about our footprint and how we ease it up. So I've talked quite strongly with a whole lot of theory about this. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples just to get your brains going, because I know Michael's going to break you up and ask you lots of difficult questions. But to just get you thinking on some of these examples, I'm sure I'm going to flash up someone that nobody knew about before we went into COVID lockdown, and now you all know who he is. This is Joe Exotic, and for anyone who hasn't come across it, it's a show called Tiger King. Do yourself a favor, watch it. And you know how many people have said to me, oh, you must be worried about this show. He's showing the deep secrets behind how zoos operate. You know, is this the last straw that will destroy zoos? And I'm left going, what's the argument that makes you think I'm like this man? Is there an argument that says Joe Exotic is a zookeeper, and zookeeper Joe Exotic does terrible things, therefore zookeepers do terrible things? Is that what it is? Because I can assure you, we haven't got plans to murder anyone. I don't employ my staff and pay them with their meth to support their meth addictions. We don't pull cubs away from their mothers while they're being born. In fact, he just does terrible things. The fact he's a zookeeper is irrelevant. He could have any other profession and he'd be just as terrible a person. And we could run the same argument on lawyers. Lawyer X argument would look exactly the same. That says X is a lawyer, X did terrible things, so lawyers do terrible things. These are bad arguments. They draw generalizations based on very little information, and we should be able to really argue them away incredibly quickly. Here's another one, and this one looks a bit more complicated, and it looks like it's something that should worry us a bit more. It says it's prima facie unethical to hold animals in captivity because captivity imposes suffering, and it's wrong to impose suffering on a sentient being. And I see my colleagues read something like this and get worried that maybe this is true. Maybe it is unethical to do what we do. But the same way that I approached the Tiger King example, I'd ask you to think about this here. I can give you exactly the same argument, but change away from zoos into schools. And schools impose suffering on children. They bore them, they stress them, they create anxiety, they make them write exams. It's wrong to impose suffering on children, so it's unethical to send children to school. When you lay it out like that, it just looks like a stupid argument. We can see that clearly there's a whole lot missing, that there's more to this argument than just schools are not there just to create suffering for children. But how about hospitals? Because those guys do, you know, they make people suffer. They impose pain on people. So this kind of a quick argument that looks really like it's getting to the nub of it, we need to be able to unpack these, to break it down and say, okay, let's break it down. The premises that Jess Pierce is trying to make is she's saying captivity imposes suffering. It's wrong to impose suffering. Therefore, it's unethical to keep animals in suffering. And I could put up a second one. I could put a counter that says, well, actually captivity reduces suffering. A lot of animals have a burden of pests. A lot of animals are going extinct in their natural environment. If you're a prey species, trust me, you want to be in captivity. You don't want to be out there with all the predators. If you're a predator, once you're over the median of your age, you very rapidly can't get enough food to eat. Captivity reduces the suffering of hunger, disease, a whole lot of things. It's desirable to reduce suffering, and so therefore it's desirable to keep animals in captivity. And now we actually have a question we can throw to science. We can say to science, well, let's start working on this out. Does captivity impose or reduce suffering for animals? Because if we can answer that, well, we don't have any other disagreements in the way we put that argument together. And so this is how I would suggest, and if I'm provoking you, we need to think of many of our decisions and actions and say, do they have a significant ethical content? And if they do, what is that? What are the premises I'm drawing on in terms of making this decision? And are those premises actually defendable? Because if they're not, I don't have a good conclusion. And I would suggest that this is what we all need to get better at as we want to be ethical leaders. We need to get better at using good ethical arguments instead of emotional reactions. We need to feel that emotion welling up and going, wait, hold on. What are the emotions in me that are leading me to a conclusion that this person is wrong or this action is wrong? If we don't do that, we get caught in this really short news cycles, and it's getting harder and harder to do because we're not giving the time to really work through an argument, to find the premise we disagree on, instead of straight away jumping to the fact that we disagree on the conclusion. And so I would challenge you and suggest, and this is what I know Michael's going to do, is to start clarifying your basis for ethical decision-making. What is it that you're going to draw on? Which of those theories have you read enough to know? Because if you just stick to one, you're going to get blindsided, because there's good arguments that can come from multiple different ways. Build your argument, throw it down. Build your argument, tear it down as many times as you can. Secure evidence for your premises, and then understand the counter arguments. Because people who disagree with you are seldom stupid or uneducated. They just have different information. They have different premises, and they're coming at this from a different angle. And sometimes when we break it down, we can actually find a third way that has something much better in it. And it's really just that simple. That's all you got to do. So Michael, I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Jenny. I think a couple of things. I think that's a slide deck that everyone, probably one slide deck that everyone would love to see again, which is quite rare. There's kind of wonderful photographs in there. And thank you for that. It's been really interesting for those of you who have been through the Senior Executive Program, and I know Peter Marsden on the Zoom call tonight, the time we spent with Cranlana, much of this stuff had came up in those conversations, but it was wonderful to see it so clearly laid out there. I was left reflecting on some kind of deeply held beliefs that I've clearly jumped to at some point in my life, and I've built up a story about. And, you know, in the times that we live in just now, this time of polarization, that capacity to kind of explore those beliefs seems like gold. Also, that I was very taken with that idea of the sort of the tragic dilemmas. I'm sure a lot of people, when you talked about that, you know, could reflect on things, even in very recent days, where they've been left in that sort of tragic dilemma. There's no good option, but there is responsibility and there's choice. That feels like ethics. That feels like an ethical dilemma.